Today's video is going to be about animal behavior. Animal behavior in general being just a response to the changing environment. And there's a variety of ways that the animal can respond to the changing environment. It can respond with a physiological change. Remember, the physiology is how the body works. So a physiological change, anytime you see this triangle, you all need to think change now. So a physiological change is going to change the function of the body. So how the body is working. So for example, you may see, you see this a lot with temperature regulation, or acclimation. And so you may see the capillaries, the little tiny blood vessels, dilate to release heat. You see that in people. You can see that on very fair-skinned people, how they turn bright pink or red when they're hot, because those blood vessels near the surface of their skin are dilating to release the heat and help them maintain their body temperature. So that would be a physiological response to a changing environment. Another example could be a morphological response. This would be a change in the body structure, so in the actual anatomy of the body. For example, you see some animals that will grow thicker fur in the winter, or their fur will change color in the winter. You have those hairs that will, as it becomes closer to during the winter time, their hair will turn, their fur will turn white. When it comes back into the springtime, it'll change back to a brown, enabling them to blend into their surroundings better. So that would be an example of a morphological response. The third kind could be a behavioral response. So they have an actual change in their behavior to help respond to the environment. For example, you may see they may move to a different location. So migration would be a change in behavior. Cooperative behavior. So they may be working with other organisms as the environment change to help with their fitness and their survival. You may see aggressive behavior when they feel threatened. And so we're going to focus a lot on these various behavioral responses throughout this video today. Some of these behaviors are what we would consider innate behaviors, and some of these behaviors are learned behaviors. Most of you have heard of the nature versus nurture debate, and we're going to talk a little bit about how both of these things are going to come into play. So the behavior in general is just going to be the response. It's the nervous system's response to a stimulus. So it is carried out by the muscular system or the endocrine system. So this may be something as simplistic as a reflex, where the muscular system is responding to the stimulus, or it may be something more complex. We also have, like I mentioned, we're going to talk about what are called an innate behavior. So an innate behavior is one that is fixed. It doesn't matter about the environment. So environment does not have an influence on this. So this would be part of that. This would not be a learned behavior. It has a very strong genetic component. For example, this would be the agonistic behavior, that innate behavior to defend your territory, your nesting site against an invading organism. A learned behavior is going to be one that is due to your cognitive development. These can change due to experience and the environment. These are not as genetically predisposed. You're not as genetically predisposed to these. These would be, for instance, a mother teaching its children how to eat, how to hunt for food, how to gather food. Those would be examples of a learned behavior. There are two kinds of questions we can ask to determine these types of behaviors. The first one is what's called a proximate question. A proximate question focuses on the environmental stimulus. So its concern is, how did the behavior happen? What triggered that behavior to occur? So in addition to what made that behavior occur, it also looks at the physiological, the genetic mechanisms of the behavior. Since the focus here is the environmental stimuli, we're looking at the entire, basically the process of the behavior. So how did it happen, or how did it get modified, as well as what are the physiological, the genetic mechanisms that cause that behavior to happen. Your ultimate question is going to focus more on the evolutionary impact of that behavior, the evolutionary significance of that behavior. And evolution is going to be a huge part of our of every topic that we do this year. Okay? Evolution is one of the underlying themes in AP biology. We try to tie it in every single where we can. Okay? And with behavior, evolution comes into play with the fact that if the behavior was not evolutionary beneficial, then the behavior would no longer occur. It would be essentially weeded out of the population. So the ultimate questions look at what is the benefit of the behavior and why did that behavior happen. Why is this going to be an evolutionary benefit for the organism to portray this particular behavior? Remember, with evolution, it's all about how does it help me pass on my genes. So how does this behavior help the organism ensure that its genes are passed on to the next generation? Okay, so let's talk about some competitive social behaviors. These are usually representing a contest for resources. And so these can be amongst organisms of the same species. Okay, so again, they're a social behavior, but they are, as a general rule, they're relatively, these particular ones are competitive. Or they're some of the behaviors they exhibit after the competition is over. Okay, so the first one we have here is our cooperative behavior. Okay, you can see this happening, very easy to see here with the pack of hyenas. Okay, the hyenas are working together to bring down the wildebeest there. So with a cooperative behavior, the animal is investing resources in a common interest shared by all of the members. And so in this instance, the common interest would be food. And so they all invest their resources there so that as a group, they can bring down this wildebeest. And as a group, then they will all benefit from that food resource. Another example we have here is this agonistic behavior. Okay, the agonistic behavior is going to be more aggressive behavior. Okay, this could possibly involve fighting. It has basically three divisions with it. Okay, you've got the threat. So for instance, here you have these wolves. Okay, they're in the third division here, the submission. Okay, this wolf here has submitted to these wolves that are still standing above it by showing its belly. Okay, you have the threat. Okay, if need be, the actual aggression. Okay, and then the submission, where usually one of the animals will submit to the others. Okay, it does not usually result in actual harm, because actual harm then obviously decreases the fitness of the organism, decreases its reproductive success. So that's why a lot of this agonistic behavior stops here at the threat level. Some other competitive social behaviors would be reconciliation behavior. This would happen after conflict, and this is exactly what it sounds like. The conflict has occurred, and the two individuals have reconciled, or they've made up. Okay, the agonistic behavior between the two of them is complete, and so they have decided to reconcile their differences. Okay, also a dominance hierarchy. This would be a competitive social behavior here. This involves ranking, pecking order, where you have an alpha male or a alpha beta male or female. where they establish dominance over the group of individuals. So this is a ranking of the individuals. That dominance many times is done by some form of aggression, some form of agonistic behavior. Usually as a general rule, the alpha, a lot of times it's a male, the alpha male will usually do extra work. They control and influence the behavior of the other organisms in the group. So these dominance hierarchies have a large impact on the social outcome of the group by having this alpha organism that's going to do this extra work and control the other's behaviors. So our next behavior is what's called a fixed action pattern. So a fixed action pattern, this is a series of unlearned innate, so that's what I mean by an innate behavior. It's an unlearned behavior. Remember, they have a large genetic component, and it's an unchangeable behavior. Once this behavior has been initiated, it has to be completed. So once this behavior has begun, it has to finish. So it has to go through all the various steps of the particular behavior. This behavior is triggered by what's called a sign stimulus. In this instance, in this example that we have over here, the sign stimulus is the red belly there. So the sign stimulus is some kind of external sensory stimulus. So in this case, with the fish here, it is a visual stimulus. So this fish up top, this fish here is called a stickleback. So this fish here is called a stickleback, and this fish will display very aggressive behavior toward any fish that has a red underside. So a red underbelly, you can see it here. And so it will display that agonistic, aggressive behavior to those organisms. In this case here, you can see during this experiment, they used all these different shapes. It didn't matter what the shape was, it just mattered that it had a red underbelly. And as soon as that three-spine stickleback saw that red underbelly, that external sensory stimulus, it went through this fixed action pattern, and it will attack that intruder fish. It cannot process the information and decide that it's not actually a fish, that it's this weird diamond-shaped object that they put in there. The sensory stimulus has come through. Once the behavior has started, it will complete. So after that stickleback experiment was completed, the gentleman that did that, Tinbergen, came up with 4 questions that could really be used to help understand any animal behavior. The first one being, what stimulus elicited the behavior? So, for instance, with the fish, it would be that red underbelly. And what physiological mechanisms mediate that response? So when it saw that red underbelly, what were the changes that happened physiologically in the stickleback fish so that it wanted to go attack the intruder, or what it thought was the intruder? The second one, how does the animal's experience during growth and development influence the response? So this is part of that learned behavior. As the animal is growing and developing and seeing other fish have this response, is that going to influence it? The third being, how does the behavior aid its survival and reproduction? Survival and reproduction, remember, is extremely important for evolution. So if this behavior is going to aid its survival, possibly, if it's chasing away a fish that may take away some of its resources, is it going to aid its reproduction? Is it going to enable it to help spread its genes onto the next generation? And then the fourth one being, what is the behavior's evolutionary history? And so when looking at these questions, remember we talked at the very beginning that we had both proximate and ultimate questions. Numbers 1 and 2 are what would be considered proximate questions, dealing more with the stimulus, the physiological change. 3 and 4 are ultimate questions, referring more to the evolutionary aspects of the behavior. But the thought is that these 4 questions can be used to basically understand any kind of animal behavior. Our next behavior is imprinting. Imprinting has both learned and innate components. It is irreversible. So once this process has happened, you cannot go back. So for instance, over here on our example, we have geese here that have imprinted on this person. Okay, and that's permanent.